I'm not asking you to understand me, Abby. I'm asking you to stop holding me back. Drew Callahan said it like that was supposed to be reasonable, like those words didn't land in the middle of their kitchen and crack the whole night open. Abigail froze with one hand resting on her pregnant stomach, the other still wrapped around a mug that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Outside their apartment in downtown Chicago, rain tapped softly against the windows, but inside, the air felt tighter than a closed fist. "Holding you back?" she asked, almost whispering, because if she said it louder, she thought she might break. Drew looked past her, not at her. That was the part that hurt the most. He was already somewhere else in his head, somewhere polished and expensive and far away from the life they used to talk about building together. "I've got a real opportunity in front of me," he said. "Northbridge wants people who think bigger, people who belong in bigger rooms." Abigail gave a small, stunned laugh, but there was no humor in it. "And you think I don't belong in your life now because I'm pregnant?" Drew rubbed a hand over the back of his neck, impatient, like she had turned a simple conversation into a problem. "That is not what I said." "It's exactly what you said," she replied, and now her voice was shaking. She had spent the last 7 months carrying his child, watching his stress rise with every late meeting and every new name he mentioned, and still she had tried to believe this was just pressure, just work, just life getting hard in the way life always does. But tonight was different. Tonight, he had spent nearly an hour at some private dinner with a woman named Jade Whitaker, and when he came home, he had the look of a man who had just seen a better version of the life he thought he deserved. "She understands my world," he said quietly. Abigail stared at him. "She?" Drew finally looked at her then, and the guilt on his face was so thin it almost looked rehearsed. "Jade. She's connected. She knows people. She has access. She can open doors." Abigail felt the words like a slow drop in temperature. "So this is about her." He didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. On the counter beside the sink sat the mail she had meant to sort earlier, along with a glossy invitation for a Northbridge Capital cocktail event. Jade Whitaker's name was printed in elegant gold across the front, and under it, in smaller type, Drew's. Not hers. Drew noticed her looking at it and reached for the envelope, but Abigail was already holding it tighter. "You're really doing this," she said, more to herself than to him. Drew exhaled, frustrated now. "I'm trying to build something. You should want that for me." Abigail looked at the man she had married, the man who used to kiss her forehead on the way out the door, the man who once swore he would never let success turn him into somebody cold. And in that quiet, terrible second, she realized he was already halfway gone. And somewhere out there, a woman with perfect hair and a perfect smile was helping him leave. The next morning, Drew was already dressed before the sun came up. Abigail stood in the doorway of their bedroom in an oversized sweater, watching him tie his watch on with the same careful hands he used when he wanted to look in control. "You are leaving early again?" she asked. Drew did not look up from the mirror. "Northbridge has meetings all day. This is important, Abby. Everything is important to you now," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He finally turned, and for a second she saw something like irritation flash across his face, not because she was wrong, but because she was still there asking questions. "I am trying to make sure we are secure," he said. "For the baby, too." Abigail let that hang in the air. He always brought up the baby when he wanted to soften a hard thing. It used to work. Not anymore. After he left, the apartment felt too big and too quiet. She made herself toast, then stared at it until the butter cooled into a shiny skin. Her phone sat face up beside the plate, and when it buzzed, her chest tightened before she even looked. It was a calendar alert from Drew's shared account. Northbridge Capital. Private reception. Jade Whitaker. Abigail tapped it once, then again, like the screen might change if she pressed hard enough. It did not. The name sat there in neat black letters, clean and elegant and cruel. She looked around the kitchen, half expecting the walls to explain what she was missing. On the counter near the sink, tucked under a grocery receipt, was a folded card she had not seen the night before. It was expensive paper, heavy in her hand, embossed with the Northbridge logo. The invitation inside was meant for a couple, Drew and guest. Not Drew and Abigail. Just Drew. Her stomach turned. She set the card down and tried to breathe through the tightness in her chest. The baby kicked once, low and faint, as if reminding her to stay still. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "Okay, I see it now." The words sounded calm, but her fingers were shaking. She went to the couch and sat very carefully, one hand over her stomach, the other gripping the edge of the cushion until her knuckles blanched. Memories started coming back in pieces she had not wanted to arrange. The long dinners that lasted too late. The phone turned face down. The cologne he did not usually wear. The way he had stopped reaching for her at night unless it looked good on the surface, unless it fit the version of him he wanted to keep wearing. She was still sitting there when her sister, Marissa, called. Abigail answered on the first ring. He is doing something, Abigail said immediately, before Marissa could even say hello. There was a pause, then Marissa's voice softened. Tell me everything. Abigail looked down at the invitation again. Drew's name. Jade Whitaker's name. Northbridge Capital. The life they were supposed to be building, already shrinking around someone else's idea of her husband. I think, Abigail said slowly, each word scraping on the way out. I think he is not just falling out of love with me. She swallowed hard and felt her eyes sting. I think he is preparing to replace me. And somewhere across the city, Drew had no idea that the woman he had left behind was finally beginning to see the shape of the lie. By noon, Abigail had stopped pretending the invitation was just a mistake. She spread the card out on the kitchen table, opened her laptop, and typed Northbridge Capital into the search bar with a kind of slow, careful anger that made her feel steadier than panic ever had. Drew had always talked about big rooms and bigger money, but now she was seeing the shape of those rooms for herself. Sleek glass towers, board members, private events, photos of Drew standing beside Jade Whitaker like they were already a headline. Her stomach tightened, not from the baby this time, but from the realization that this was not a casual crush or a harmless dinner. This was planned. This was public. This was deliberate. When Marissa came over an hour later, she took one look at Abigail and knew not to waste time with soft language. You found something, she said. Abigail turned the laptop toward her. Marissa leaned in, brows pulling together as she scrolled. Okay, she muttered. That is not just flirting. That is a storyline. Abigail let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but it died before it could fully form. He is taking her to Northbridge events now. He did not even mention it to me. Marissa sat down across from her. Because he knows exactly what he is doing. That is what scares me, Abigail said. Her hand rested on the curve of her stomach. He is not confused. He is choosing this. For a while neither of them spoke. The refrigerator hummed. A siren passed somewhere far outside. Then Marissa tapped one of the images on the screen. Who is this woman really? Abigail had already asked herself that question 100 times, but now it sounded different, sharper. Not who is she to him. Who is she, period. She clicked through another page, then another, and a pattern began to show itself. Jade Whitaker was everywhere and nowhere. Luxury photos, fundraising events, charity boards, a perfect smile, perfect clothes, perfect access, but almost no history, no real family mentions, no childhood stories, no old interview clips. That is strange, Abigail said quietly. Very strange, Marissa replied. Abigail opened a new tab and searched the name again, this time adding words that should have made the answer easy. Heir, family office, trust. Nothing solid came back, only polished fragments and recycled bios. This woman feels manufactured, Abigail said. Marissa looked up at her. Then maybe she is. The baby shifted again, stronger this time, and Abigail closed her eyes for a second, one hand pressing gently against her belly. It was the first time all day she felt tears rise, but they were not helpless tears. They were the kind that come when something inside you finally stops making excuses. I do not think he is just leaving me, Abigail said. I think he is being pulled into something he does not understand. Marissa nodded slowly. Or somebody wants him to think he understands. That landed hard. Abigail opened the invitation again and stared at the embossed Northbridge seal. Drew's name. Jade's name. A couple that looked perfect on paper. A woman who looked too polished to be real. A man who wanted to be seen standing beside her. And her, the pregnant wife sitting alone at a kitchen table, suddenly certain that the most dangerous part of this whole thing was not what Drew was hiding from her. It was what somebody was hiding from Drew. She looked up at Marissa, eyes clear now, voice lower, steadier. I need to know who Jade Whitaker really is. Marissa nodded once. Then we start there. And for the first time since Drew came home with that look in his eyes, Abigail was not just reacting. She was hunting for the truth. The problem with looking closer is that sometimes the truth does not show up all at once. It shows up in little pieces, and each piece feels worse than the last. That is exactly what happened to Abigail the next evening, when Marissa showed up with a laptop under one arm and 2 iced coffees in her hand. "I found something weird," she said, setting everything down on the kitchen table. Abigail had barely slept. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharper than they had been the day before. "You say that like it is new," she muttered. Marissa gave her a look. "No, I mean weird even by rich people standards." Abigail leaned in as Marissa opened a series of pages, company filings, event photos, and old social posts. Jade Whitaker was not hard to find if you only searched the polished version of her life. She was always standing beside somebody important, always smiling in the right room, always dressed like she belonged there. But the more Marissa clicked, the more empty the story became. "Look at this," Marissa said, tapping the screen. Her charity board position was announced 6 months ago, but there is no record of her doing any real work before that. No school history, no old hometown photos, nothing. It is like she appeared fully formed. Abigail frowned. "That is not normal." "No," Marissa said. "It is curated." Abigail sat back slowly, one hand moving to her stomach out of habit. So maybe Drew is not falling for a woman. Maybe he is falling for a performance. Marissa did not answer right away, because they both knew that was probably true. She clicked one more file open, then paused. "Wait, this is interesting." Abigail looked over. It was a guest list for a private Northbridge dinner. Not just Drew and Jade. 2 senior partners, a family office advisor, and a name at the bottom that made Abigail sit up straight. Gordon Lancaster Holdings. Abigail stared at the screen. "Lancaster?" Marissa nodded. "You know that name?" "Only vaguely," Abigail said. "My mother used to mention it once in a while, like it was part of some old world I was never supposed to touch." Her voice dropped. "I never asked why." Marissa looked at her carefully. "Abby, do you think this Jade Whitaker thing is tied to your family somehow?" Abigail did not answer right away. She remembered something small from years ago, something her mother used to say when the subject of money came up. "Not everything valuable is loud. Some things stay quiet because they are safer that way." At the time, Abigail thought it was just one of her mother's little sayings. Now it felt like a warning. She reached for her phone and opened the old contact list she had not touched in ages. One number sat there under a name she had not said out loud in years. Her mother's former attorney. "I think," Abigail said slowly, "that I need to ask a question I have avoided for a very long time." Marissa watched her type the number. "About your family?" Abigail shook her head. "About who I was before Drew." The call rang twice. Then a man answered, polite and cautious. "This is Henry Vale." Abigail swallowed. Her heart was beating too hard, too fast. "Mr. Vale," she said, steadying her voice, "my name is Abigail Mason, and I need to know if you still have the papers my mother left behind." There was a pause on the other end, so long it made the room feel smaller. Then Henry said, much more carefully now, "Miss Mason, I have been waiting for this call." Abigail went completely still. Marissa looked at her like she had just walked through a door they both knew had been locked for years. And in that one quiet second, Abigail understood that Drew was not the only person about to learn she had been hiding something. She had been hidden too. Henry Vale did not waste a second. "Miss Mason, your mother told me this day would come," he said, his voice low and careful, like he was speaking around a room full of broken glass. Abigail stood frozen in her kitchen, one hand still gripping the phone, Marissa hovering beside her with her mouth slightly open. "My mother?" Abigail repeated. "You knew her?" "Very well," Henry said. "Enough to know she trusted almost no one with what I am about to tell you." Abigail glanced at Marissa, then turned away like the walls might give her privacy. "Tell me." Henry paused. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, heavier now. "Your mother did not just leave behind papers. She left behind instructions. A trust, a name, and a reason for keeping both out of the public eye." Abigail swallowed hard. "What name?" Another pause. "Lancaster." The room seemed to tilt. Abigail pressed a hand to the counter to steady herself. "No," she said softly, like maybe saying it out loud could push it back into hiding. Henry continued anyway. "Your mother did not want you raised inside that world. She believed money made people careless, and power made them cruel. She wanted you safe. So she built a wall around your life and asked me to honor it." Marissa stared at Abigail like she was seeing her for the first time. Abigail felt her pulse in her throat, loud and fast. You are telling me my mother came from the Lancaster family? I am telling you, Henry said, that you are the last person who should ever have been treated like a background character. Abigail shut her eyes for a second. It was too much, too fast, and yet every little thing from the last 2 days suddenly made a different kind of sense. The polished dinner invites, the name on the guest list, the way Jade Whitaker had felt more built than born. And Jade? Abigail asked, what does she have to do with this? Henry was quiet again, and that silence scared her more than a yes would have. Jade Whitaker has been moving through the same circles as people tied to your family interests, he said carefully. But she is not who she claims to be. Not even close. Abigail looked down at her stomach, then back at the phone. So Drew is being played. Possibly, Henry said. Or he is helping someone play him. I cannot tell that part from here. Marissa leaned closer, whispering, ask him what you are supposed to do. Abigail did not need the reminder. What am I supposed to do? She asked. Henry answered immediately this time. Come see me tomorrow morning. Alone, if possible. Bring nothing but your identification. Do not tell your husband. Not yet. Abigail felt the word husband hit harder than it should have. It sounded almost outdated now, like something that belonged to a different life. Why? She asked. Because if Drew knows you are connected to the Lancaster name before you understand what the trust contains, he will not just panic, Henry said. He will move. Abigail went cold. Move where? Toward whatever protects him, Henry replied. And away from you. The line went quiet after that, but only for a second. Then Henry added one last thing, gentler now, and somehow that made it worse. Your mother was very specific, Miss Mason. She said the moment people start choosing for you, that is the moment you have to choose for yourself. The call ended. Abigail stood there with the phone in her hand, not moving, not blinking, as the full weight of what he had just said settled over her. Marissa exhaled slowly. So, she whispered, you are not just dealing with a cheating husband. Abigail looked up, her face pale but steady. No, she said. I think I am standing at the edge of a much bigger lie. And somewhere across the city, Drew was about to find out that the woman he had underestimated was no longer standing alone in the dark. By the next morning, Abigail had barely slept, but she did not look like someone who was falling apart anymore. She looked like someone who had finally decided to stop pretending. Marissa drove her across the city to a quiet law office in a stone building that did not look important from the outside, which somehow made it feel even more serious. Inside, Henry Vale was already waiting in a glass-walled conference room with a thin leather folder in front of him and a calm expression that made Abigail feel both safer and more nervous at the same time. You came alone, he said, standing up as she entered. That was wise. Abigail gave a small nod and sat down carefully, one hand resting low on her stomach. I am still trying to understand why my mother never told me any of this. Henry folded his hands. Because she knew exactly how people change when money enters the room. He slid the folder toward her, but did not let go right away. Your mother did not want you to grow up as a target. Abigail opened the first page and saw a trust agreement with her mother's signature, the Lancaster name, and her own name printed underneath in a line she had never seen before. For a moment she could not speak. It felt too strange, too clean, too impossible. This is real, she whispered. Very real, Henry said. And very old. He pointed to the next page. Your mother placed restrictions on everything. Access, public disclosure, inheritance timing. She wanted you protected until you were ready. Abigail looked up sharply. Ready for what? Henry met her eyes. For the people who would come near you once they realized who you are. The room fell quiet. Even the city sounds outside the window seemed far away. Henry continued. That includes your husband. Abigail's jaw tightened. Drew does not know any of this. No, Henry said. But he is already around the edges of it. He turned to another document, then another. There were names she recognized from Northbridge, from old gala guest lists, from the polished world Jade Whitaker seemed to float through with such ease. Jade is not a true heiress, Henry said. She is connected to someone who is using her as a front. The goal is simple. Get close to the right men, borrow the right image, and gain access to the right family interests. Abigail stared at him. So Drew was never chasing love. He was chasing a setup. That appears to be part of it, Henry said. Abigail let out a breath and looked down at the papers again. Her fingers trembled once, but she did not pull away. And my mother left me all of this while I was living like I had nothing? Henry gave a small, sad smile. She left it to you because she knew that when the time came, you would need more than money. You would need proof. He reached into the folder and pulled out one final item, a sealed invitation card from Northbridge Capital. Not the one Abigail had seen before. This one was marked in silver ink with a private name list. Drew Callahan was printed on it. So was Jade Whitaker. And at the bottom, in smaller type, was a line that made Abigail go still. Special attendance requested by the Lancaster Trust. Abigail felt the blood drain from her face. He is already being pulled into my world, she said quietly. Henry nodded once. And tomorrow night, he will walk straight into it. Abigail closed the folder slowly, her mind racing ahead even as her body sat perfectly still. She could feel it now, the shape of the trap, the shape of the truth, the shape of the moment when Drew would realize he had not just abandoned his pregnant wife. He had underestimated the woman whose name was about to change everything. The night of the Northbridge event arrived faster than Abigail wanted it to. By 6 o'clock, the city was already glowing through the apartment windows, and she stood in front of her mirror in a simple black dress that made her look calm even though her pulse had not slowed all day. Marissa was behind her, fastening a small earring into place. You do not have to look nervous, she said. Abigail let out a quiet breath. I am not nervous. Marissa arched an eyebrow. That is the most nervous thing you could have said. Abigail gave a short laugh, but it faded quickly. Her hands moved to her stomach, gentle and protective. I just keep thinking about his face when he realizes I am there. Marissa met her eyes in the mirror. That is the point. Abigail looked down at the invitation in her hand. Special attendance requested by the Lancaster Trust. Those words had been sitting in her mind all day like a timer counting down. Henry said Drew is already on the guest list, she murmured. He does not know why. Then let him keep not knowing, Marissa said. For one more night. Across the city, Drew was standing in the men's lounge at Northbridge, adjusting his cuff links and trying to look like he belonged there more than he felt it. Jade hovered beside him in a silver dress that caught the light every time she moved. She was smiling, but only with her mouth. Her eyes kept drifting toward the entrance, toward the other side of the room, as if she was waiting for something or someone to go wrong. You seem distracted, Drew said under his breath. Jade touched his arm lightly. I'm just thinking about the crowd tonight. Northbridge is not the kind of place where people forgive mistakes. Drew gave a thin smile. Then let us not make any. But he already felt it, that odd pressure in the air, the same feeling he had before a meeting went bad and everyone started pretending it was fine. A man from the event staff approached them with a tablet. Mr. Callahan, there has been a change to the seating arrangement. Drew frowned. A change. The staff member glanced at Jade, then back to Drew. Yes, sir. One of the private tables was reassigned under a trust request. You and Miss Whitaker will be seated closer to the Lancaster family section. Drew blinked. The Lancaster family section? The staff member only nodded politely and moved on. Jade went quiet beside him. That is unusual, she said. What is, he asked. She took a second too long to answer. Nothing. But the word came out too quickly. Drew turned toward her. Jade. She gave him a look that was almost annoyed. Do not start acting paranoid tonight. We are fine. He should have let it go. Instead, he watched her too closely. Her smile did not reach her eyes anymore. Her hands were tense around her clutch. And when she checked her phone, she did it like someone confirming a message she had been waiting for. Meanwhile, Abigail stepped out of the car in front of Northbridge Capital and stood beneath the glass tower, the evening wind catching the hem of her dress. Henry was beside her, offering one last calm look before they walked in. Once we cross that door, he said, there is no going back to the version of this story Drew believes. Abigail drew in a slow breath. She was not thinking about revenge. Not exactly. She was thinking about her mother. About all the years she had lived quietly while other people decided what she was worth. About the baby growing inside her. About the man upstairs who had looked at her pregnancy like it was a limitation instead of a life. She lifted her chin. Good, she said. I am done being invisible. Inside, the ballroom was all polished glass, soft music, and people who smiled too much. Drew stood near the center, trying to enjoy the attention, trying to believe he was still in control. Then the room shifted. Just slightly. Not because anyone spoke, not because the music changed, but because every head near the entrance began to turn. Drew looked over with the others, and when he saw Abigail walking beside Henry Vale, all the blood seemed to leave his face at once. And that was before he saw where she was heading. For a second, the whole ballroom seemed to forget how to breathe. Drew stood frozen near the center of the Northbridge room, his glass still in his hand, his expression stripped clean of every polished idea he had brought with him that night. Abigail kept walking, one measured step at a time, one hand resting lightly at her side, the other near her stomach. She was not rushing. She was not smiling. She was simply moving forward like a woman who no longer needed permission to enter a room that had been built to keep her out. Henry Vale walked beside her with the kind of calm that made people move without realizing they were moving. Whispers started instantly. Not loud whispers. The kind that spread from table to table like a thin spark. Who is that? Why is Henry Vale with her? Is that the Lancaster Trust attorney? Drew heard enough to turn slowly, and when his eyes met Abigail's, the color drained from his face in a way that almost satisfied the room around him. Jade stepped closer to him, but even she looked uneasy now. Who is she? She asked under her breath. Drew did not answer. He could not. Abigail stopped a few feet away, close enough for him to see that she was not trembling, close enough for him to see that whatever power he thought he had over her had already started to disappear. Henry gave a respectful nod to the small cluster of executives and trustees near the front table, then looked directly at the event host. Before this evening continues, he said, his voice carrying cleanly through the room, there is a trust matter that needs to be addressed. That was all it took. The room fell silent in a way that felt almost surgical. A man at the head table set down his fork. A woman near the bar turned fully toward the entrance. Even Jade went still. Henry opened the folder he had been carrying and placed one paper on the nearest table. Then another. Abigail Mason is not here by mistake, he said. She is here by invitation under the Lancaster Trust. A murmur ran through the crowd. Drew blinked hard, like he had misheard. What are you talking about? He said, his voice rougher than he wanted it to sound. Abigail looked at him and, for the first time all night, let him feel how small he had become in her eyes. You really did not know, she said softly. Drew stared at her. Know what? Henry answered for her. That the woman you left at home while you chased a polished lie is the sole beneficiary of the Lancaster inheritance. The sentence landed like a dropped plate. A few people audibly gasped. Jade's face changed so fast it was almost ugly. That is not possible, she said. Henry did not even look at her. It is documented, signed, and protected. He turned a page, then another. The trust was created by Abigail's mother. The family connection was kept private for years, which means every move made around that name tonight was based on incomplete information. Drew looked from Henry to Abigail, then to the papers, then back again. His mouth opened once, but no words came out. He had spent weeks acting like he was upgrading his life, reaching higher, choosing better, stepping into a world that made more sense to him. Now the world had turned and showed him he had been standing in it all along without recognizing the woman at the center of it. Jade, on the other hand, took one sharp step back. Her hand tightened around her clutch. This is insane, she said too quickly. Henry finally looked at her, and when he did, the expression on his face was almost pity. No, he said. What is insane is pretending to be someone you are not while attaching yourself to a family structure you do not understand. The room went colder. Drew turned to Jade slowly, like he was seeing the seams in her dress for the first time. What does he mean? He asked. Jade did not answer. Her eyes had gone fixed and flat, and that silence said more than any defense could have. Abigail watched the moment fracture in real time. Drew was no longer the man in control of the room. Jade was no longer the golden answer to his insecurity. And the more the trust papers moved from hand to hand, the more everyone around them began to realize the same thing at once. The woman Drew had left behind was the only person in the room who had never needed to pretend. The silence after Henry's words was the kind that changed a room forever. Drew stood there with his glass half lifted, but he was not drinking anymore. He was just staring at Abigail like he had finally seen her, and by then it was too late. The papers on the table told the truth his pride had spent months refusing to notice. The woman he had treated like a burden was not beneath him. She had been standing above the whole story all along. Abigail did not rush to speak. She let the moment breathe. Let the room feel it. Let Drew sit inside the full weight of what he had done. "You left me," she said quietly, and her voice did not shake. "Not because I stopped being enough. Because you stopped seeing me." Drew's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Jade was still standing a step behind him, her face pale now, all that polished confidence gone thin and nervous. Around them, people who had been smiling an hour earlier were suddenly looking at their plates, their phones, the ceiling, anywhere but at the center of the room. Henry closed the folder with a soft, final sound. "The trust has been reviewed," he said. "Any attempt to misrepresent affiliation, influence, or access to Miss Mason's family interests will be dealt with immediately." Jade's eyes flashed. "This is ridiculous." Henry did not blink. "No, it is documented." That was the moment the last piece of Jade's image broke apart. She had not walked into this room as a true heiress. She had walked in as a costume built for men who wanted to believe in shortcuts. And Drew had fallen for it because he wanted the appearance of power more than the truth of a woman standing in front of him. Abigail looked at him one last time. Not with hate, not with tears, just with the kind of tired clarity that comes when someone has finally outgrown the pain they were forced to carry. "I am not angry because you chose someone else," she said. "I am relieved you showed me who you are before my child had to learn it from you." Drew looked stricken now, really stricken, the kind of expression that comes when a man realizes the thing he thought he was replacing was the only thing that had ever made his life whole. "Abby, please," he said, and the words sounded smaller than the room. "I made a mistake." Abigail gave a slow nod. "Yes," she said, "you did." Then she rested a hand over her stomach and turned slightly, not away from him in anger, but away from the life he no longer had access to. "But this is the part you never understood," she said, her eyes steady now, her voice calm enough to carry to every corner of the ballroom. "Being chosen is not the same as being valued. And being abandoned is not the same as being broken." Drew swallowed hard. The room stayed still. No one rescued him. No one explained him out of it. No one softened the cost. He had spent so long chasing the image of a woman like Jade that he had never noticed the woman he married was the one person in the room who could not be replaced. And Abigail, with her mother's legacy behind her, her child ahead of her, and her dignity fully intact, did the one thing he had never expected. She walked away without asking him to follow. That was the real ending. Not the trust. Not the reveal. Not the humiliation. It was the fact that she did not need revenge to prove her worth. She only needed the truth. And once the truth was out, the rest of his life had to live with it.